The original Chandler stories that did just as much bad as good for the African American culture, which the Disney company found out the hard way as they constantly went backwards and forward upon the script. Despite having a number of consultants on the script, Donald Raymond only took on board a fraction of the feedback for the final script, which earned his approval on the Hayes office, allowing the film to go into pre-production with a middling budget of $2 million, then commencing in principal photography in 1944, being filmed in Hollywood in Samuel Goldwyn Studios. Directing duties were given to Har Foster, with the animation being supervised by Wolfer Jackson. The role of Uncle Remus, the pinnacle of the heart and soul of the whole picture, was played by James Baskett. Initially starting his career to study pharmacology, but lacking the finance to study, James turned towards a career of acting in Hollywood. He had actually previously worked for Disney in the 1941 film Dumbo, doing a voice of one of the crows.
I've seen a dragonfly.
Many years later, when he was enrolling for Song of the South, he was intending just to do a bit part, voicing a butterfly. But when Walt Disney was listening to his voice, he wanted a chance to personally meet James Baskett one-on-one. When the two men met up, Walt Disney convinced James Baskett to audition for the role of Uncle Remus. And not too long after that audition, he got the gig. He played not only Uncle Remus, but also the butterfly and Brer Fox. Mr. Disney admired James Baskett. According to his sister, he said, "He is the best actor I believe to be discovered in years, working wholly without direction." After production of the film had concluded, Walt Disney and James Baskett kept in close contact, but during this time James Baskett's health was heavily decreasing. Disney sent gifts and ample amount of money to help him and his family get on by, but that wasn't enough. Disney wanted to ensure at the Oscars that his performance wouldn't be unnoticed, but through a loophole at the time the Academy wouldn't recognise an actor if they wouldn't get top billing, but he was probably not nominated for a much more unfair reason. James Baskett's co-star Hattie McDaniel at the time was the only other African American to actually win an Oscar. It was still extremely rare for anybody of colour to even be nominated.
I wish somebody would help me right now, because I didn't expect, so I had nothing in my mind.
But Disney was able to convince the Academy to give an honourable reward to James Baskett during the 20th Academy, historically making him the first African American man to ever win that reward. Sadly though for James, it would be a short-lived victory, as he would pass away only 4 months later. Jamie was played by named at the time Bobby Driscoll, who was the first actor to be under a personal contract with the Disney company, starring in many early Disney live-action features, and he would eventually go off and be the voice of Disney's Peter Pan. By this time he had renamed himself Robert Driscoll, as a way to distance himself from his younger image. By the 60s he was struggling with a drug addiction. He relocated to New York to start a new life, but he would pass away in 1968. Ginny was played by Luana Patton, who started her career as a child model, with Song of the South being her first feature film, reuniting with Bobby in another Disney flick called So Dear to My Heart. She would go on acting as an adult, but never reaching the same popularity from her days at Disney, and would eventually retire in 1986. She would pass away a decade later at the age of 57. The young African American that befriends Johnny, Little Toby, was played by Glenn Leby. He was discovered playing on the playground by a Disney talent scout, and out of the 3 main child actors he was the oldest at the age of 7, and also was promoted the least when it came to the marketing of the movie. Him and his family relocated to Los Angeles in the hopes for him to pursue a career into acting. Although unlike his co-stars, he didn't appear in any other feature films. Glenn Leby would be remarried several times and have many children, and would pass away at the age of 68. Real-life couples at the time, Ruth Warwick and Eric Rolfe, played Johnny's mother and father, but however they separated during the same year that the movie was released. Hattie McDaniel acted as Aunt Tempe, and as mentioned earlier, was the first African American to win an Oscar in the 1939 epic Gone with the Wind. It too is usually compared to Song of the South for having the same racial inner problems. Hattie would usually find very little variation upon her acting career, usually playing a servant or a maiden. But as Hattie would go on to say, she would rather be paid $700 for playing a maiden in a big feature film rather than working as a real maiden for $7. For Hattie, there was just simply no other job that really paid like being in the movies. And Hattie knew that she had to be well integrated within the Hollywood system.
I was whining and crying all the time because I hated the way I had to act. Mammy said to me, "You'll never come back to Hollywood again because you complain too much."
For the main character of the animated segments, Brer Rabbit was played by John Donson Lee Jr. Probably his best known work outside of Song of the South was his frequent appearance in the Amos and Andy show, reigning from the 50s, and was also one of the earliest television programs to heavily feature black actors. The slow, dim-witted but charming Brer Bear was played by Nick Stewart. He was anti-Uncle Tom or any other black stereotype, and also heavily against the minstrel shows. Although his acting roles, he walked a very thin line, from characters that could be classed as black stereotypes. Nick Stewart really loved the character of Brer Bear.
Walt Disney's Song of the South, and in the center is Uncle Remus, James Basket. And behind Uncle Remus, you see him peeping around? I did the voice of Brer Bear. I'm just gonna knock your head clean off.
In fact, he reprised the role as Brer Bear in the 1989 theme park ride inspired from the movie Splash Mountain. During the same year as the opening of the theme park ride, Jim Corcus, Disney historian and also fanboy, asked Nick Stewart towards how did he feel about being in the film, that did he find the role slightly demeaning.
And he just gave the biggest laugh I'd ever heard in my entire life. And he says, "Are you kidding? Disney treated us like kings." He took that money and in Los Angeles, he created the Ebony Theater Workshop in order to give black actors roles other than maids and butlers.
Nick Stewart spent his entire career keeping the Ebony's Theatre open. Unfortunately, the building was demolished in 1998 beyond Nick Stewart's control, but in 2007 in Los Angeles, a theatre was reopened in its name, with a similar goal of appreciating African American culture. Sadly, Nick Stewart wouldn't be around to see it, as he passed away in the year 2000, living to the grand old age of 90. Before its release, the title was revised, changing the name from Uncle Remus to Song of the South. Premiering on November 12th at Atlanta, Georgia, with the majority of the white cast were there, but the black cast were unable to attend. Because Georgian law would not permit them into the movie theatre, Mr. Disney left the premiere once the movie was screening. While he was happy during the interval presenting, but he feared that an unexpected audience reaction would upset him, so he retreated across the street to his hotel room for the night. The film garnered a mixed critical response, with some that either loved it or sickly disliked it. Walter Francis White, the executive secretary for the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, came onto the scene to write a statement on the feature. This is what he had to say, and I quote, "In an effort neither to offend audiences within the North or South, the production helps to perpetuate a dangerously glorified picture of slavery, making use of the beautiful Uncle Remus folklore. Song of the South unfortunately gives an impression of an idyllic master-slave relationship, which is a distortion from the facts. Although it's worth noting that he actually never saw the movie, only getting a memo from two other members that saw the movie, which made him a bit perplexed to how to write a statement for the film. Eventually the film would garner a backlash, with groups outside of the movie theatre protesting upon its playing, with some of the cast and crew such as James Basket defending his role as Uncle Remus, with Walt Disney staying absent from the debate, being deeply upset as to why the film was gaining so much backlash. He felt that he placed these stories on a new platform for people to appreciate. But regardless on its reviews, it still did moderately alright at the box office, allowing Disney to finally proceed onwards with his other projects. Regardless of its backlash, Song of the South was treated on the same value as any other Disney property, as the cartoon characters appeared in commercials, along with the cartoon segments being shown in various formats upon television. In 1956, Walt Disney created a special hour-long program as a tribute to John Chandler Harris,
and gave the people outside the South their first knowledge of of these beloved animal legends told on the plantations by the old Negro storytellers.
As a special way to promote the re-release of Song of the South that same year, but the tribute to John Chandler Harris ceased re-airing during 1960, along with any re-releases of Song of the South during the duration of the 1960s. This may have been in light of the big political movement of that decade concerning the equal treatment between whites and blacks.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual.